On a brisk Monday morning, 7-year-old Jamie Wilson hunched lower in his seat as Ms. Peterson circled the classroom checking homework assignments, his empty desk exposing the secret his mother had tried desperately to hide. They simply couldn't afford this month's school supplies after Dad lost his job. The veteran teacher stopped abruptly at Jamie's desk, her voice cutting through the classroom silence like a blade as she held up his blank notebook for everyone to see, asking, "Did you think you were special enough to ignore the assignment that everyone else managed to complete? If you love stories about classroom moments that reveal the true character of both teachers and children, please subscribe to our channel now so you won't miss these powerful tales of humanity in action." What happened next in that third-grade classroom would not only change Jamie's life forever, but would teach Ms. Peterson a lesson far more valuable than anything in her teaching manual. A lesson about compassion that began when little Sophia Martinez from the back row stood up with determination in her eyes. Sophia Martinez had always been taught by her parents that kindness wasn't optional, it was necessary. Sitting in the back row of Ms. Peterson's third-grade class, she felt a knot form in her stomach as she watched Jamie Wilson shrink further. Into his chair, his face flushed with shame as their teacher continued her lecture. "This is the third assignment this week you've failed to complete properly," Ms. Peterson said, her voice sharp with disapproval. "Everyone else manages to come prepared. What makes you think the rules don't apply to you?" Tears welled in Jamie's eyes as whispers rippled through the classroom. Sophia gripped her pencil tightly, her knuckles turning white. This wasn't right. This wasn't fair. She had seen Jamie wearing the same faded t-shirt 3 days in a row. She had noticed how he never bought lunch, but also never brought one from home. How he would sometimes look longingly at other children's colorful pencil cases and notebooks. Before she could reconsider, Sophia pushed back her chair and stood up. The scraping sound drew everyone's attention, including Mrs. Peterson's, whose eyebrows rose in surprise. "I have extra supplies, Mrs. Peterson," Sophia said, her voice trembling slightly but growing stronger with each word. "I can share with Jamie." The classroom fell completely silent. No one interrupted Ms. Peterson when she was disciplining a student. No one. "Sit down, Sophia," Ms. Peterson said, her tone clipped. "This is between Jamie and me." But Sophia didn't sit. Instead, she reached into her desk and pulled out her spare notebook and a pencil. "My papa always says that we rise by lifting others," she said, walking deliberately to the front of the classroom. Jamie looked up at her with wide, disbelieving eyes as she placed the supplies on his desk. "Here, Jamie, you can use these." Ms. Peterson's face flushed. "Sophia Martinez, return to your seat immediately." Sophia had never disobeyed a teacher before. Her parents had raised her to respect authority, to be the perfect student. But they had also told her stories about how they had crossed the border from Mexico with almost nothing, how strangers had helped them when they needed it most, how her father had worked 3 jobs so her mother could finish nursing school. "We must always remember where we came from," her mother would say as she braided Sophia's hair each morning, "and we must always help those who are where we once were." So instead of returning to her seat, Sophia looked Ms. Peterson directly in the eyes. "It's not Jamie's fault he doesn't have supplies. Sometimes families can't afford things, even important things." A gasp went through the classroom. Mrs. Peterson's mouth opened and closed, temporarily speechless at this unprecedented challenge to her authority. In the heavy silence that followed, something remarkable happened. Marcus Johnson, the quiet boy who sat by the window, stood up. "I have an extra folder," he said, his voice barely audible, as he walked to Jamie's desk and placed it next to Sophia's notebook. Then Lily Chen stood. "I have extra pencils," she said, adding them to the growing pile. One by one, children rose from their seats, each bringing something to share: erasers, crayons, markers, paper. Jamie sat frozen, tears now flowing freely down his cheeks as his empty desk transformed into an abundance of supplies. Mais bon, Peterson watched in stunned silence as her carefully controlled classroom slipped from her grasp. "That's enough," she finally managed, her voice strained. "Everyone back to your seats this instant." The children hesitated, caught between ingrained obedience to their teacher and the powerful moment of solidarity they had just created. "This is completely inappropriate," Ms. Peterson continued, struggling to regain control. "Sophia, you will go to Principal Garcia's office immediately for disrupting my class." Sophia felt a flutter of fear in her chest. She had never been sent to the principal's office before. Her parents would be so disappointed. But when she looked at Jamie's face, a mixture of gratitude, relief, and lingering shame, she knew she had done the right thing. "Yes, Miss Peterson," she said, straightening her shoulders, as she had seen her mother do when facing difficult situations at the hospital where she worked. As Sophia walked toward the door, Jamie suddenly spoke up, his voice small but clear. "Thank you," he said, looking not just at Sophia, but at all his classmates who had shared with him. Mrs. Peterson clapped her hands sharply. "The rest of you, open your math textbooks to page 42. Jamie, since you now have the necessary supplies, I expect you to complete today's assignment along with making up the work you missed." As Sophia stepped into the hallway, she heard Mrs. Peterson resume teaching as if nothing unusual had happened, but she knew something had fundamentally changed in room 18. She walked slowly toward the principal's office, her stomach churning, with anxiety but her heart certain. Sophia had never met Principal Garcia except for seeing her at school assemblies. She was a tall woman with salt and pepper hair, always pulled back in a neat bun, who spoke with a slight accent that reminded Sophia of her grandmother. Students said she was strict but fair, though Sophia had never expected to test this reputation firsthand. Outside the principal's office, Sophia sat on a hard plastic chair, legs swinging nervously above the floor. Through the window in the door, she could see Principal Garcia on the phone, nodding seriously. What would happen now? Would she be suspended? Would her parents be called? The thought made her stomach twist painfully. Sophia thought about her father, who worked long hours at his construction job but never failed to help her with homework. She thought about her mother, who, despite working night shifts as a nurse, always made time to listen to Sophia's stories about school. They had such high hopes for her, the first in their family to be born in America, to have all the opportunities. They had sacrificed so much to provide. They will understand, Sophia whispered to herself, remembering how just last week her parents had invited a new family from their apartment building for dinner. A family with little money and 3 small children. Her mother had sent them home with leftovers and a bag of groceries. "Helping others is never wrong," her father had told her that night as they washed dishes together. The office door opened and Principal Garcia stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Sophia Martinez," she said, her voice neither angry nor kind. "Come in and tell me why you're here." Sophia took a deep breath and walked into the office, ready to explain what had happened, and why, no matter the consequences, she would do the same thing again. Principal Elena Garcia's office was neat and colorful, with student artwork framed on the walls and a small potted cactus on her desk. Sophia perched on the edge of a chair that felt too big for her, hands folded in her lap, the way her mother had taught her. "Ms. Peterson says you disrupted her class and encouraged other students to do the same," Principal Garcia said, reading from the note the teacher had sent. "That doesn't sound like the Sophia Martinez whose name I see on the honor roll every quarter." Sophia swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to disrupt class, Principal Garcia. It's just that Jamie didn't have any supplies, and Ms. Peterson was making him feel bad about it in front of everyone." Principal Garcia set down the note, studying Sophia with keen brown eyes. "Tell me exactly what happened, please." Sophia recounted the morning's events, how Jamie sat at his empty desk, how Ms. Peterson had held up his blank notebook for everyone to see, how she had questioned why Jamie thought he was special enough to ignore the assignment. "And you felt you needed to intervene?" Principal Garcia asked, her expression neutral. Yes, ma'am, Sophia replied. My parents always say that when we see someone being treated unfairly, we shouldn't just watch. They tell me stories about when they first came here and how hard it was and how kind people made all the difference. Something flickered in Principal Garcia's eyes, recognition, perhaps, or memory. She leaned back in her chair, seeming to come to a decision. Sophia, do you know why I became an educator? Sophia shook her head. When I was about your age, my family moved here from Puerto Rico. My English wasn't very good, and we didn't have much money. Principal Garcia gestured to a black and white photograph on her bookshelf showing a young girl in a too large uniform. That's me, my first day at Lincoln Elementary. My mother had sewn my uniform from discounted fabric that wasn't quite the right shade of blue. Sophia listened intently, surprised by this glimpse into her principal's past. My teacher, Mrs. Diaz, noticed I didn't have proper school supplies. Instead of calling attention to it, she gave me a notebook and pencils, saying they were extras she kept for students who forgot theirs. Principal Garcia smiled slightly at the memory. Her kindness allowed me to maintain my dignity while still getting what I needed. That's why I became an educator, to be that person for other children. Sophia's shoulders relaxed slightly. Principal Garcia wasn't angry with her. What you did for Jamie was kind, Sophia. Standing up for others takes courage. But there are ways to help people that preserve their dignity and don't challenge a teacher's authority in front of the whole class. Sophia nodded slowly, understanding dawning. I could have waited until after class to offer Jamie my extra supplies. Exactly, Principal Garcia said. Or you could have come to me or another staff member with your concerns about Jamie. A gentle knock interrupted their conversation. Ms. Reynolds, the school secretary, poked her head in. Sarah Wilson is here to see you about her son, Jamie? Principal Garcia nodded. Please send her in. Moments later, a thin woman with tired eyes and Jamie's same sandy hair entered the office. She wore scrubs with a name tag from the local hospital, and her expression was worried. Ms. Wilson, thank you for coming, Principal Garcia said, rising to shake her hand. This is Sophia Martinez, a classmate of Jamie's. Sarah Wilson looked at Sophia with confusion. Is Jamie okay? The secretary just said, there was an incident involving my son. Principal Garcia gestured for her to sit. Jamie is physically fine, Ms. Wilson. We're addressing a situation that occurred in class today. She briefly explained what had happened. Careful to present the facts without judgment. Sarah Wilson's face flushed with embarrassment. We've been having a difficult time since my husband left, she admitted, her voice strained. I've been picking up extra shifts at the hospital, but it's not enough. Jamie's father hasn't sent child support in months, and she paused, collecting herself. I told Jamie we'd buy new school supplies next week, after I get paid. I didn't realize he needed them for an assignment today. Sophia sat very still, understanding for the first time the adult complexities behind Jamie's empty desk. Principal Garcia's expression softened. Ms. Wilson, Northside Elementary has resources for families experiencing temporary difficulties. We have a supply closet specifically for situations like this. I don't want charity, Sarah Wilson said quickly, pride evident in her voice despite the slight tremor. We're going to be fine. I just need a little time. Principal Garcia leaned forward. It's not charity, Ms. Wilson. It's community. Many of our local businesses donate supplies so all our students can have what they need to succeed. Would you deny Jamie that support? Sophia thought of her own parents, how hard they worked, how proud they were. My mama says accepting help when you need it is as important as giving help when you can, she offered quietly. Sarah Wilson looked at Sophia, really seeing her for the first time. You're the girl who gave Jamie supplies? Sophia nodded, suddenly. Shy? Thank you, Sarah said simply, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Principal Garcia opened a drawer and removed a form. Ms. Wilson, if you're comfortable, we can add Jamie to our supply assistance program. It's completely confidential. And perhaps we could discuss other resources that might help, during this transition period? After a moment's hesitation, Sarah. Wilson nodded. That would help us a lot right now. Principal Garcia smiled warmly. Excellent. Now, there's one more matter we need to address. Ms. Peterson's handling of the situation. Sophia tensed again, worried she had gotten her teacher in trouble. I believe in turning challenges into learning opportunities, Principal Garcia continued. Sophia, I'm going to ask you to return to class with a note for Ms. Peterson. Ms. Wilson, would you be willing to meet briefly with me and Mrs. Peterson after school today? Both Sophia and Jamie's mother agreed, and Principal Garcia quickly wrote a note, sealed it in an envelope, and handed it to Sophia. Remember what we discussed? About finding ways to help that preserve dignity, she said as Sophia stood to leave. And Sophia, I'm proud of your compassion, even if the execution needs some refinement. Sophia nodded, clutching the envelope and feeling lighter than when she had entered. In the hallway, she passed Jamie's mother, who reached out and squeezed her hand gently. Thank you for being kind to my son, Sarah Wilson whispered. Sophia smiled shyly. That's what friends do, she replied, realizing as she said it that she meant every word. Jamie Wilson was her friend now, and friends looked out for each other. As she walked back toward classroom 18, Sophia wondered what Principal Garcia had written in her note to Mrs. Peterson, and what would happen when she returned to class. The morning had already contained more drama than Sophia had experienced in her entire school career, and it wasn't even lunchtime yet. Catherine Peterson had been teaching third grade at Northside Elementary for 17 years. She prided herself on running an orderly classroom where expectations were clear and standards were high. Structure and discipline, these were the gifts she gave her students, the foundation they would need for future success. At least, that's what she had always believed. Now, as her students worked quietly on their math problems, she found herself questioning those long-held convictions. The morning's disruption had shaken her more than she cared to admit. She glanced at Jamie Wilson, who was diligently working with the supplies his classmates had provided, and felt an uncomfortable twinge of something that might have been shame when Sophia Martinez returned from the principal's office and silently handed her a sealed envelope. Mrs. Peterson nodded briskly and slipped it into her desk drawer without opening it. She could feel the curious eyes of her students watching, wondering what consequences their classmate faced for her rebellion. But Mrs. Peterson wasn't ready to find out herself, not with 24 children waiting for her guidance through fractions. Back to work, everyone, she said firmly, and the classroom returned to its familiar rhythm of pencils scratching on paper and the occasional raised hand for help. Only when the children filed out for lunch did Mrs. Peterson finally open Principal Garcia's note. She expected a reprimand, perhaps a summons to discuss classroom management. Instead, she found a brief message that hit her like a physical blow. Catherine, Jamie Wilson's mother will be meeting with us after school today at 3:30. Before then, I encourage you to reflect on how we can address student needs while preserving their dignity. Remember why you became a teacher. Elena, remember why you became a teacher. Those words followed Mrs. Peterson through the rest of the day, echoing in her mind as she moved through her lessons with mechanical precision. When the final bell rang and her students rushed out into the sunshine, she remained at her desk, staring at the nearly empty classroom. Why had she become a teacher? Catherine Peterson's mind drifted back 25 years to her own childhood, in a small apartment above her parents' struggling dry cleaning business. She had been a studious child, finding refuge in books and learning while her parents worked 14-hour days. Her teachers had been her heroes, especially Mrs. Lambert, her fourth-grade teacher, who had recognized Catherine's intelligence and pushed her to excel. Structure creates freedom, Mrs. Lambert would say. Master the fundamentals, and you can go anywhere. Catherine had embraced this philosophy, carrying it through college and into her own classroom. She had seen how her clear expectations and rigorous standards helped students achieve, especially those who lacked structure at home. She truly believed she was doing what was best for them. But today, looking at Jamie Wilson's face as she had held up his empty notebook, Catherine had seen something that haunted her. The same look of humiliation she had felt in 5th grade when her worn-out shoes had finally split apart during recess, exposing her toes to her classmates' mockery. Her parents had worked so hard, saved every penny, but there had never been quite enough. Catherine had learned to hide their poverty through perfect behavior and academic excellence. No one had ever needed to know that sometimes dinner was just rice with soy sauce, or that Christmas gifts were practical necessities disguised as presents. She had spent her career ensuring her students wouldn't face the same struggles she had, believing that high standards and strict discipline would give them the tools to overcome adversity. But today, she had become what she had most feared as a child, the adult who exposed vulnerability instead of protecting it. The realization sat heavy in her chest as she gathered her materials for the meeting with Principal Garcia and Jamie's mother. In her 17 years of teaching, Catherine had held countless parent conferences, always perfectly prepared with documentation and improvement plans. Today, for the first time, she felt unprepared and uncertain. As she walked toward the principal's office, Catherine passed the teacher's lounge where her colleague Marge was gathering her things. "Had a rough day?" Marge asked, noting Catherine's uncharacteristically disheveled appearance. Catherine paused. "Did you know Jamie Wilson's family was struggling financially?" Marge nodded slowly. "Sarah's been on her own since Mark left around Christmas. She's working double shifts at Memorial Hospital to make ends meet." "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Catherine asked, a note of defensiveness creeping into her voice. Marge gave her a strange look. "It's in his file, Catherine, and Sarah mentioned it at the parent-teacher night in January. You were there?" Had she been? Catherine vaguely recalled a blur of parents, her standard speeches about curriculum and expectations. Had Sarah Wilson tried to tell her something important that she had dismissed in her efficiency? "I need to go," Catherine said abruptly. "I have a meeting with Elena and Mrs. Wilson." "Good luck," Marge replied, her tone suggesting Catherine might need it. Outside Principal Garcia's office, Catherine took a deep breath and straightened her blazer. Whatever happened in this meeting, she would be professional. She would listen. She would adapt. Because despite the day's revelations, one thing remained certain. She cared about her students, all of them. When she entered, Sarah Wilson was already seated across from Principal Garcia. The younger woman looked exhausted, still in her hospital scrubs, her hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail. Catherine felt another pang of recognition. How many times had her own mother looked just as tired after a long day of pressing clothes and managing difficult customers? "Ms. Peterson, thank you for joining us," Principal Garcia said, her tone warm but professional. "We were just discussing how we might better support Jamie during this challenging time for his family." Catherine took the remaining chair, acutely aware of Sarah Wilson's tense posture. "I want to apologize for how I handled the situation this morning," she said, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. In 17 years, she had rarely needed to apologize to anyone. "I wasn't aware of your circumstances, but that's no excuse for embarrassing Jamie." Sarah Wilson's shoulders relaxed slightly. "I should have reached out," she admitted. We've always managed before. I didn't want Jamie to be treated differently. I understand pride," Catherine said quietly. "But children shouldn't bear the weight of adult problems." Principal Garcia nodded approvingly. "We've enrolled Jamie in our supply assistance program," she explained to Catherine. "And I've suggested that Ms. Wilson consider our after-school program, which would give Jamie a supervised place to complete homework while she finishes her shift." Catherine found herself nodding. "I could provide additional support during my lunch period if Jamie needs help catching up," she offered, surprising herself with the suggestion. The meeting continued, practical solutions emerging from their shared concern for Jamie's well-being. By the time they concluded, Catherine felt something shift within her, a rigid framework bending to accommodate new understanding. As she gathered her belongings to leave, Sarah Wilson touched her arm lightly. "Jamie actually loves school," she said. "He talks about science experiments and your reading circle all the time. He was so worried about disappointing you today." The words pierced Catherine's carefully constructed professional armor. All day she had been thinking about what she had done wrong, but she hadn't considered what she might have been doing right all along. Walking to her car in the empty parking lot, Catherine made a decision. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, she would begin to balance the structure she valued with the compassion her students deserved. Tomorrow, she would remember why she became a teacher. Ms. Peterson arrived at school an hour earlier than usual the next morning, a large shopping bag in each hand. She had stopped at the office supply store on her way home yesterday, spending more than she could comfortably afford on notebooks, pencils, markers, and other classroom essentials. If she was going to make changes, she would start immediately. The empty classroom greeted her with familiar silence as she flipped on the lights and set her purchases on the desk. For years, she had maintained the same classroom layout, rows of desks facing forward, her own desk prominently positioned at the front, supply cabinets locked and accessible only with permission. Today, she would try something different. Catherine began rearranging the furniture, pushing desks into small clusters instead of rigid rows. She cleared a corner shelf and carefully arranged the new supplies she had purchased, adding a sign that read community supplies, take what you need, share what you can. From her cabinets, she retrieved teaching materials she had accumulated over the years but rarely used, creativity kits, art supplies, building blocks, and placed them on accessible shelves. By the time she finished, the classroom looked noticeably different, more open, more welcoming. She stood in the doorway, surveying her work with a mixture of satisfaction and apprehension. Would this actually help, or was she just assuaging her own guilt? "Quite a change," came Principal Garcia's voice from behind her. Catherine turned, slightly embarrassed to be caught in this moment of transformation. "I thought it was time for a new approach," she said, aiming for a casual tone. Principal Garcia smiled. "Change can be good for everyone, teachers included." She glanced at the community supply station. "That's a wonderful idea, Catherine." "It's just a start," Catherine admitted. "I've been thinking about what you said, about remembering why I became a teacher. I want my students to be successful, but I've been defining success too narrowly." "The best teachers never stop learning themselves," Principal Garcia replied. "I'll be interested to see how your students respond." With an encouraging nod, she continued down the hallway on her morning rounds. Students began arriving 30 minutes later. Catherine stood at the door, greeting each one by name as usual, but today she added something new, a genuine smile, and a personal question or comment for each child. When Jamie Wilson arrived, looking apprehensive, she bent slightly to meet his eyes. "Good morning, Jamie. I'm glad you're here today." The boy glanced up, clearly surprised by her warm tone. "Good morning, Mrs. Peterson," he replied cautiously. "Go on in," she encouraged. "There's a new seating arrangement, so find a spot that feels right to you." As students entered the classroom, their reactions told Catherine everything she needed to know. Wide eyes, excited whispers, tentative exploration of the newly accessible materials. They moved through the space as if discovering a foreign country, unsure of the customs but eager to learn. Sofia Martinez arrived last, her dark eyes serious as she approached the doorway. Catherine had prepared for this moment, knowing this particular student deserved special acknowledgement. "Good morning, Sofia. Thank you for yesterday." Sofia blinked in surprise. "You're not mad at me." Catherine shook her head. "You showed great courage and compassion. Those are qualities I should have recognized and encouraged, not punished." A small smile bloomed on Sofia's face as she entered the classroom. immediately noticing the changes. Catherine watched as the girls spotted Jamie sitting alone at a cluster of desks and purposefully joined him, soon followed by Marcus and Lily. From yesterday's impromptu supply-sharing rebellion. Once all students were settled, Catherine moved to the front of the room, suddenly nervous, in a way she hadn't been since her first year of teaching. Change was indeed challenging, even when necessary. "Good morning, everyone," she began. "As you can see, I've made some changes to our classroom." 24 pairs of eyes watched her with varying degrees of curiosity and caution. Yesterday, something important happened in our class. It wasn't on our schedule or in our curriculum, but it might be one of the most valuable lessons we learned this year. Catherine paused, gathering her thoughts. "Sophia and many of you showed me that being a community means supporting each other, especially when someone is struggling." The children remained quiet, but she could see them processing her words, trying to reconcile this new Ms. Peterson with the strict disciplinarian they knew. "I've created a community supply station," she continued, gesturing to the corner shelf. "These materials belong to all of us. If you need something, you may take it without asking permission. If you have extra supplies to share, you can add them to our collection." Whispers of excitement rippled through the room. "Additionally, our new seating arrangement will help us work together as teams. You'll have opportunities to help each other and learn from each other's strengths." Jamie raised his hand hesitantly. "Does this mean we have to share everything?" he asked, a note of worry in his voice. Catherine understood his concern. After being singled out for having nothing, he feared being forced to give up what little he had. "Not at all, Jamie. Personal items remain your own. The community supplies are extras, donated for everyone's use. Your own belongings are still private." Relief visibly washed over the boy's face. "I also owe all of you an apology," Catherine continued, the words difficult but necessary. "Especially you, Jamie. I handled yesterday's situation poorly, and I'm sorry for embarrassing you." The classroom fell completely silent. In all their years with Mrs. Peterson, not one student had ever heard her apologize. "Teachers make mistakes too," she added with a small smile. "And when we do, we should acknowledge them and try to do better next time." Sophia's hand shot up. "Does this mean we won't get in trouble for helping each other anymore?" "There's a difference between helping and disrupting," Catherine clarified. "But yes, I want to encourage more cooperation. In fact, our first activity today will be to brainstorm ways we can support each other as a classroom community." As the children began enthusiastically sharing ideas, from homework buddies to supply drives to peer tutoring, Catherine moved, among them listening and guiding, rather than directing. She noticed Jamie gradually becoming more animated, eventually offering his own suggestion about creating welcome kits for new students so they would have everything they need from day one. By the time morning recess arrived, the energy in Classroom 18 had transformed as dramatically as its physical appearance. Children filed out to the playground talking excitedly about their new projects and teams, leaving Catherine alone to reflect on the remarkable shift. On her desk lay Principal Garcia's note from yesterday, its message now serving not as a reprimand, but as a reminder. Remember why you became a teacher. Looking around at the collaborative space she had created, Catherine felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the pure, uncomplicated joy of making a positive difference in her students' lives. It was why she had become a teacher in the first place, and somehow she had almost forgotten. Over the next week, Classroom 18 continued its remarkable transformation. The new seating arrangement fostered unexpected friendships. The community supply station operated smoothly, and Mrs. Peterson found herself enjoying teaching in a way she hadn't for years. She still maintained high standards. Her students were still expected to complete their work and follow classroom rules, but the atmosphere had shifted from rigid compliance to collaborative achievement. On Monday morning of the following week, Ms. Peterson stood before her class with an announcement. Today, we're going to begin a special project, she said, writing community problem solving on the whiteboard. In your teams, you'll identify a real problem in our school community and develop a plan to solve it. Excited murmurs rippled through the classroom. Hands shot into the air with immediate questions. Can we pick any problem? Marcus asked. Within reason, Ms. Peterson replied. It should be something that affects students here at Northside Elementary. Will we actually get to do our solutions, or is this just pretend? Lily wanted to know. Mrs. Peterson smiled. If your solution is practical and principled, Garcia approves, yes, you can implement it. This isn't just an exercise, it's real community action. This revelation sent a new wave of excitement through the room. Third graders were rarely given opportunities to make actual changes in their school environment. You'll work in teams of 4, Ms. Peterson continued, holding up a class list. I've assigned the groups based on complementary skills. She began reading names, and students moved to join their teammates. When she announced Team 3, Jamie Wilson, Sophia Martinez, Zach Taylor, and Olivia Chen, Jamie looked up in surprise. Sophia gave him an encouraging smile as they gathered at a cluster of desks near the window. You have today and tomorrow to identify your problem, Ms. Peterson explained as she distributed planning worksheets. On Wednesday, each team will present their problem and proposed solution to the class. Thursday and Friday will be for refining your plans based on feedback. Next week, you'll begin implementation. As the classroom buzzed with conversation, Mrs. Peterson moved from group to group, listening and occasionally offering guidance. When she reached Jamie's team, she found them already deep in discussion. What about the lunch lines? Zach was suggesting. They take forever, and then we hardly have time to eat. Olivia shook her head. The 5th graders already did a project on that last year. They created the number system for the lines. Sophia turned to Jamie. What do you think? You've been pretty quiet, Jamie hesitated, then spoke softly. What about kids who can't afford stuff for school, like supplies and things? A brief silence fell over the group. They all remembered the incident that had sparked the classroom changes. That's a real problem, Sophia agreed, her voice gentle but enthusiastic. I bet there are other kids besides Jamie who don't have everything they need. But Ms. Peterson already fixed it with the community supply station, Zach pointed out. Jamie shook his head. That's just for our classroom. What about the rest of the school? Ms. Peterson, listening quietly, felt a surge of pride at Jamie's insight. The boy who had been too embarrassed to admit he couldn't afford supplies was now advocating for others in similar situations. I think that's a great problem to tackle, she encouraged. How might you learn more about the scope of this issue? Olivia, whose mother was the PTA president, brightened with an idea. We could make a survey, ask teachers if they have students who need supplies, maybe find out what items are most needed. We could research how other schools handle it too, added Zach, warming to the topic. Sophia was already sketching on her worksheet. Maybe we could create a supply closet for the whole school, like Ms. Peterson did for our class, but bigger. Jamie, who had been quiet again, suddenly spoke up. What if we could make it so no one feels embarrassed about needing stuff? His mom's voice carried the weight of personal experience. Like maybe there could be a way for kids to get supplies without everyone knowing they need help. Ms. Peterson nodded approvingly. That's an important consideration, Jamie. Dignity matters. As she moved on to the next group, Mrs. Peterson glanced back to see Jamie becoming more animated, pointing to Sophia's sketch and offering suggestions. The shy, withdrawn boy from last week was gradually emerging from his shell, empowered by the opportunity to turn his own painful experience into something positive for others. By the end of the day, all 6 teams had identified problems to address. The lack of buddy benches on the playground, insufficient books featuring diverse characters in the library, the need for a better recycling system, playground equipment accessibility for students with physical disabilities, kindergartners getting lost in the hallways, and from Jamie's team, school supply inequality. On Wednesday morning, each team presented their problem and initial solution ideas to the class. When it was their turn, Jamie's team approached the front together, but to everyone's surprise, it was Jamie who began the presentation. "Our team is addressing the problem of school supply inequality," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "Some kids can't afford all the supplies they need, which makes it hard to do schoolwork and can make them feel bad about themselves." Sophia stepped forward with their visual aid, a poster showing statistics they had gathered from a quick survey of other teachers. "We found that in every classroom at Northside, teachers report having at least 2 students who regularly lack necessary supplies," Zach continued, "and when we talked to the school counselor, she told us that some families have to choose between buying school supplies and paying for other important things like food or medicine." Olivia explained their proposed solution. "We want to create a school-wide supply exchange program where students can access materials they need without embarrassment, and families who can afford to donate extra supplies have an easy way to help." As they fielded questions from their classmates, Mrs. Peterson noticed Jamie growing more comfortable, with his responses becoming more detailed and confident. When Marcus asked, "But how will you make sure kids don't feel embarrassed taking supplies they need?" Jamie had a ready answer. "We thought about that a lot," he explained. "Our idea is to have a supply shop that's open to everyone. Students can shop for what they need, but nothing costs money. Kids who need supplies can get them for free, and no one will know who's taking what they need versus who's just browsing." Ms. Peterson couldn't help but smile at the elegant solution, one that addressed both the practical need and the emotional complexity of the issue. When all presentations were complete, she addressed the class. "I'm incredibly impressed with your thoughtful approaches to real problems in our school. Tomorrow, you'll receive feedback from me and your classmates to help refine your plans." As students packed up at the end of the day, Miss Peterson overheard Sophia asking Jamie, "Do you want to come over tomorrow after school to work more on our project? My mom said it's okay." Jamie hesitated. "I have to ask my mom. She works late, so I usually go to my neighbor's house after school." "You could both come to my house," Sophia suggested. "My mama makes the best cookies." Ms. Peterson watched as Jamie nodded shyly, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Beyond addressing a practical need in the school, this project was fostering connections between children from different backgrounds, perhaps its most valuable outcome of all. That evening, as she reviewed the project presentations and prepared her feedback, Catherine Peterson reflected on how quickly things had changed. A classroom crisis had transformed into an opportunity for growth, not just for her students, but for herself as well. For the first time in many years, she felt like she was truly living up to her calling as an educator. The Northside Elementary main hallway buzzed with activity as parents and students explored the school's annual Innovation Showcase. Colorful displays lined the walls, each representing a different classroom's community problem-solving projects. Principal Garcia stood near the entrance, proudly explaining the initiative to a woman with a press badge and a small digital recorder. "We believe in empowering our students to become active citizens," the principal was saying. "These projects aren't hypothetical exercises. They're real solutions to real problems identified by the children themselves." Donna Chen, a reporter from the local newspaper who had come to cover the school's new robotics program, found her attention drawn away from Principal Garcia's prepared remarks. Her journalistic instincts were piqued by a particularly crowded display halfway down the hall, where 4 third graders were earnestly explaining their project to a group of attentive adults. "Would you excuse me for a moment?" Donna asked, already moving toward the commotion. As she approached, she could see a professionally designed poster with the bold heading, "Supplies for Success." Beneath it stood a small boy with sandy hair, who spoke with surprising conviction despite his soft voice. "Our research showed that in every classroom at Northside, there are kids who don't have all the supplies they need," he was explaining. "Sometimes it's because families can't afford them, Sometimes supplies get lost or broken, and sometimes kids just forget things at home. A dark-haired girl beside him jumped in. But the problem is bigger than just not having a pencil or notebook. When kids don't have what they need, they can't do their work properly, they might get in trouble, and they often feel embarrassed or different from everyone else. Donna observed the adults' reactions, nodding heads, thoughtful expressions. This wasn't just polite interest. These parents were genuinely engaged by what the children were sharing. "So what's your solution?" asked a father in a business suit, who seemed particularly impressed. A third child, a girl with glasses and a confident demeanor, pointed to a detailed diagram. "We're creating a supply shop where any student can get what they need, regardless of whether they can pay for it. It works like this. Families who can afford to donate supplies do so, creating a communal resource. Then all students, not just those who need financial help, are welcome to shop for items they need. The key part," added the fourth member of the team, a tall boy with freckles, "is that everyone uses the shop, so there's no stigma. Whether you're getting something because you can't afford it or because you just forgot your ruler that day, no one knows the difference." Donna pulled out her recorder, intrigued. This wasn't the tech-focused story she'd come for, but her editor had always encouraged her to follow unexpected leads. "Do you mind if I record your presentation?" she asked the children. "I'm Donna Chen from the Valley Tribune." The children looked at each other with wide eyes, clearly not having anticipated media attention. Their teacher, a woman in a crisp blazer who had been standing nearby, stepped forward. "I'm Mrs. Peterson, their teacher. Would you like me to explain more about the project?" But Donna shook her head, smiling. "Actually, I'd love to hear directly from the students. There's something special happening here." With their teacher's encouraging nod, the children introduced themselves, Sophia, Jamie, Olivia, and Zach, and repeated their presentation with renewed enthusiasm, this time addressing both Donna and the growing crowd of interested parents and faculty. As they spoke, Donna jotted notes beyond what her recorder captured. There was something compelling about these third graders tackling such a sensitive issue with both practical solutions and emotional intelligence. Particularly moving was the sandy-haired boy, Jamie, who spoke about the importance of dignity with an understanding that seemed beyond his years. When the formal presentation concluded and the crowd dispersed, Donna approached the team for follow-up questions. "What inspired this particular project?" she asked. The four children exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Finally, Sophia spoke carefully. "We noticed that not everyone in our school has the same access to supplies, and we wanted to make things more fair." Mrs. Peterson, who remained nearby, watched the interaction with visible pride, though Donna sensed there was more to the story than the children were sharing. "And how did your teacher help you develop this idea?" Jamie, who had been quiet since the larger presentation ended, looked up at Mrs. Peterson with an expression Donna couldn't quite read. "Ms. Peterson helped us understand that good communities take care of everyone," he said simply, "and that asking for help when you need it isn't something to be ashamed of." Something in the boy's tone and the teacher's responding smile suggested a shared history, perhaps a lesson learned together. As Donna continued her gentle questioning, she learned that the team had already secured donations from 3 local businesses, created a prototype shop in their classroom, and developed a sustainable model that could potentially be implemented district-wide. "We even made an inventory system," Olivia explained proudly, showing Donna a simple spreadsheet. "My mom helped with that part. She's the PTA president, so she knows how to organize things. And my dad's building the shelves for the permanent shop," added Zach. "He's a carpenter." "What about you two?" Donna asked Sophia and Jamie. "How are your families involved?" Sophia beamed. "My parents are helping translate all our materials into Spanish, so every family can understand the program." Jamie hesitated. "My mom, she works a lot, but she helps me practice my presentation at night." There was unmistakable pride in his voice, despite the brief hesitation. After completing her interviews and photographing the display, Donna sought out Principal Garcia again. "I came here for the robotics story, but I think I found something even better," she admitted. "There's something special happening in Mrs. Peterson's class." Principal Garcia smiled knowingly. "Sometimes the most meaningful innovations aren't technological at all. They're human innovations, new ways of taking care of each other." "Exactly," Donna agreed. "Would you mind if I shift my focus? I'd like to write about this supply project instead." "I think that would be wonderful," the principal replied. "Though I admit, I'm surprised it's coming from Catherine Peterson's classroom. She's an excellent teacher, but she's traditionally been more focused on academic achievement than social initiatives." "The most interesting stories often come from unexpected places," Donna observed. Back in her office that evening, Donna crafted her article with care, knowing that such a public spotlight could be a powerful tool for the Children's Initiative, but also aware of the sensitivity surrounding economic inequality. She titled it "Third Graders Tackle Inequality with Innovative Supply Shop," and made sure to emphasize both the practical problem-solving and the empathy driving the project. What she didn't include, what she couldn't have known, was how her article would transform not just Northside Elementary, but an entire community's approach to supporting its most vulnerable students. As she clicked send on the finished piece, Donna Chen had no idea that the simple story she'd stumbled upon would become one of the most impactful of her career. And in a small apartment across town, Jamie Wilson sat at the kitchen table with his mother carefully cutting construction paper for signs for their supply shop, unaware that by this time tomorrow, his project would be front-page news. Mom, we're in the newspaper." Jamie burst into the kitchen, the morning edition of the Valley Tribune clutched in his hands. Sarah Wilson looked up from packing his lunch, surprised by her son's uncharacteristic excitement. "What are you talking about, sweetie?" Jamie thrust the paper toward her, his finger pointing to a front-page article featuring a photo of him and his teammates standing proudly beside their project display. The headline read, "Third Graders Tackle Inequality with Innovative Supply Shop." Sarah wiped her hands on a dish towel and took the newspaper, her eyes widening as she scanned the article. "Jamie, this is amazing," she whispered, sitting down at their small kitchen table to read it properly. The article described the project in detail, quoting Jamie and his teammates directly. Donna Chen had done an exceptional job capturing the children's passion and the elegant simplicity of their solution. What struck Sarah most was how the reporter had handled the sensitive subject of economic inequality with dignity, never once portraying Jamie or children like him as objects of pity. "The reporter was so nice," Jamie explained, grabbing an apple from the counter. "She really listened to us, even though we're just kids." Sarah smiled, a lump forming in her throat, as she read a particular quote attributed to her son. "Everyone needs help sometimes. The important thing is making sure people can get what they need while still feeling good about themselves." When had her quiet, often withdrawn little boy developed such wisdom and confidence? The transformation over the past few weeks had been remarkable, ever since that terrible morning when Mrs. Peterson had shamed him, and the unexpected moment. When his classmates had rallied around him, Jamie had been slowly emerging from his shell, finding his voice. "We need to leave in 10 minutes, Sarah reminded him, folding the newspaper carefully. "I want to save this." Jamie nodded, rushing to finish his breakfast. "Ms. Peterson said we might get even more donations after the article. Do you think people will really care about our project?" Sarah had no idea how prophetic that question would prove to be. By the time she picked Jamie up from school that afternoon, the answer was clear. Mrs. Peterson met Sarah at the classroom door, looking slightly overwhelmed. "Mrs. Wilson, you wouldn't believe the response we've had today," the teacher said, gesturing toward a corner of the classroom where boxes of supplies had begun to accumulate. After the article came out, local businesses started calling the school. "Everyone wants to contribute to the supply shop." Jamie ran over to join Sophia, Olivia, and Zach, who were sorting through the donations with expressions of delighted disbelief. "Look, Mom," he called. "Greenfield Office Supply sent all of this." He gestured to a large box filled with notebooks, binders, and packages of pens. Sarah approached the growing collection, amazed by the community's response. "This is incredible," she said to Ms. Peterson. "I never expected anything like this." "Neither did I," the teacher admitted, "but it seems your son's project struck a chord with people." Principal Garcia has been fielding calls all day, not just from businesses wanting to donate, but from parents at other schools asking how they can implement similar programs. As they spoke, a tall man in a business suit appeared in the doorway, carrying a large shopping bag. "Excuse me," he said. "I'm looking for the students behind the supply shop project." Ms. Peterson stepped forward. "I'm their teacher, Catherine Peterson. The children are right over there." The man smiled, extending his hand. "Michael Reynolds from Reynolds Investment Group. I read about your students' project in the Tribune this morning. I was very impressed." Sarah watched as the businessman approached the children, who looked up at him with curious expressions. "Which one of you is Jamie?" Mr. Reynolds asked. Jamie raised his hand hesitantly, and Sophia, Olivia, and Zach. The others identified themselves. "Well, I wanted to meet the team behind such a thoughtful initiative," Mr. Reynolds said, setting down his shopping bag. "I brought some initial supplies to contribute, but I'd like to do more. My company would like to sponsor your project on an ongoing basis." The children exchanged excited glances. "What does sponsor mean?" Olivia asked. "Mr. Reynolds smiled. "It means we would provide regular donations of supplies and help fund any costs associated with maintaining your shop. We'd also like to expand the program to other schools in the district, if you're open to sharing your idea." Jamie's eyes widened. "You want to help other schools have supply shops too?" "Exactly," Mr. Reynolds nodded. "Every child deserves the tools they need to succeed." As the businessman discussed details with Ms. Peterson and the excited children, Sarah noticed Principal Garcia entering the classroom with another visitor, a woman in a stylish blazer who introduced herself as the superintendent of schools. "When I read the article this morning, I knew I had to see this innovative program firsthand," the superintendent explained. "We've been discussing district-wide approaches to addressing resource inequality, but sometimes the best solutions come from unexpected places." By the end of the afternoon, Jamie's team had met with no fewer than 6 different community leaders, all eager to support their initiative. The simple classroom project had suddenly become a district-wide movement, with the superintendent proposing that Jamie, Sophia, Olivia, and Zach present their model at the next school board meeting. As Sarah drove Jamie home, her son was uncharacteristically quiet, staring out the window with a pensive expression. "Everything okay, sweetie?" she asked. "You should be so proud of yourself. What you and your friends have accomplished is remarkable." Jamie turned to her, his expression serious. "Mom, do you remember when I didn't want to go to school because I was embarrassed about not having supplies?" Sarah nodded, her heart aching at the memory. "I felt like I was the only one with that problem," Jamie continued. "But Mr. Reynolds said there are kids in every school who don't have what they need. I keep thinking about all those kids feeling the way I felt." Sarah reached over to squeeze his hand at a stoplight. "That's why what you're doing is so important, Jamie." "But it's weird too," he admitted. "Everyone's calling us heroes and innovators, but we just came up with the idea because of what happened to me, because of something bad." Sarah considered her son's insight. "Sometimes the most important solutions come from people who have experienced the problem firsthand," she said carefully. "Your difficult experience gave you understanding that others might not have. You turned something painful into something helpful." Jamie nodded slowly, processing this perspective. "Ms. Peterson says that's called empathy in action." "She's right," Sarah agreed, marveling at how much her son was learning beyond traditional academics. As they pulled into their apartment complex parking lot, Jamie's face brightened. "Oh, I almost forgot. Sophia invited us to dinner at her house on Friday to celebrate. Her parents want to meet you." Sarah hesitated, old insecurities surfacing. What would Sophia's parents think of their small apartment, her long work hours, their struggle to make ends meet? As if reading her thoughts, Jamie added, "Sophia says her parents came from Mexico with almost nothing. They had to work really hard, like us. I think you'd like them." Sarah smiled, grateful for her son's growing ability to build bridges between different worlds. "Then we'd love to go." That evening, as Jamie worked on his homework at the kitchen table, Sarah watched him with quiet pride. The boy who had once tried to hide his empty backpack from her was now confidently organizing a community initiative that would help countless children like him. Sometimes, she reflected, the most powerful changes begin in the most unlikely places, like a third-grade classroom where a teacher's mistake and a child's courage had sparked something truly transformative. The Northside Elementary School gymnasium was packed for the monthly school board meeting, with extra chairs hastily arranged to accommodate the unexpectedly large crowd. At the front of the room, Jamie, Sophia, Olivia, and Zach sat nervously. In the first row, their presentation materials neatly organized on their laps. Behind them, Mrs. Peterson offered reassuring smiles whenever one of them glanced back anxiously. Superintendent Williams opened the meeting with a brief introduction about the evening's special presentation. As many of you have read in the Valley Tribune, we have some innovative young problem solvers at Northside Elementary. Their Supplies for Success initiative has already gained impressive community support, and tonight they'll share their vision for potentially expanding this program district-wide. As the 4 third graders made their way to the podium with a step stool thoughtfully provided for Jamie and Sophia, a smattering of supportive applause filled the gymnasium. Sarah Wilson watched her son with a mixture of pride and amazement. Just weeks ago, Jamie had been too ashamed to admit he needed school supplies. Now he was addressing the entire school board about it. The children's presentation was remarkably polished for their age, with Olivia handling the introduction, Zach explaining their research process, Sophia presenting their solution, and Jamie concluding with the impacts they'd already observed in their classroom. What they lacked in presentation experience, they made up for in authentic passion. "Our supply shop isn't just about pencils and paper," Jamie explained, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. "It's about making sure everyone can participate equally in school without feeling embarrassed or left out because of something they can't control." When they finished, Superintendent Williams invited questions from the board and audience. Initially, the responses were overwhelmingly positive, with board members praising the children's initiative and thoughtfulness. Then a man in a crisp button-down shirt stood up from the middle of the audience. Craig Reynolds, parent of a 5th grader, at Lakeside Elementary, he introduced himself. "While I appreciate these students' enthusiasm, I have concerns about the message this program sends." A subtle tension rippled through the room. "In the real world, people work for what they need," Mr. Reynolds continued. "By giving away supplies with no expectation of contribution, aren't we teaching children that they're entitled to handouts? Wouldn't a better lesson be about personal responsibility?" Jamie glanced at his teammates uncertainly, not having anticipated this kind of question. Superintendent Williams began to step in, but Sophia spoke first. "Our shop isn't just about giving things away," she said clearly. "It's about sharing as a community. Some people contribute supplies, others might help organize the shop or make thank you cards for donors. Everyone can give something, even if it's not money." Mr. Reynolds seemed unimpressed. "That's a nice sentiment, but it sounds like we're teaching children that others will solve their problems rather than encouraging parents to fulfill their basic responsibilities." Several audience members nodded in agreement. Near the back, another parent stood up. "I have to agree," said a woman in a tailored blazer. When my children need school supplies, I work extra hours if necessary to provide them. It's called parenting. These supply shops enable irresponsibility and dependence. Sarah Wilson felt her face burning as the criticism continued. These people had no idea what it was like to work double shifts and still struggle to make rent, to have to choose between buying new notebooks or keeping the electricity on. She gripped the edge of her seat, fighting the urge to speak up, afraid of embarrassing Jamie further. Principal Garcia took the microphone, addressing the concerns professionally. The reality is that many families in our district face genuine financial hardships despite working multiple jobs. The Supplies for Success program ensures that all children can fully participate in their education regardless of their home circumstances. The debate intensified, with parents on both sides voicing increasingly heated opinions. Some praised the initiative as teaching community values and practical problem-solving. Others criticized it as socialist indoctrination, inappropriate for elementary education. As the arguments continued, Jamie seemed to shrink in his chair, his earlier confidence fading. Sophia reached over to squeeze his hand supportively. "Order, please," Superintendent Williams finally intervened. "Let's remember that we're discussing a student-led initiative, and the children who developed it are present." The reminder tempered the tone somewhat, but the division in the room remained palpable. A school board member suggested tabling the district-wide expansion discussion until they could further evaluate the program's philosophical implications and establish clear guidelines. As the meeting moved on to other agenda items, the four children returned to their seats, their earlier excitement dampened by the unexpected controversy. Mrs. Peterson leaned forward to whisper encouragement, but Jamie's eyes remained fixed on the floor. When the meeting finally opened for general public comments, Sarah Wilson surprised herself by rising from her seat. Her hands trembled slightly as she approached the microphone, but her voice was steady. "My name is Sarah Wilson," she began. "I'm Jamie's mother. I work as a certified nursing assistant at Memorial Hospital, often taking double shifts to support my son since his father left us last year." The room grew quiet, all eyes now on this woman they had read about in the newspaper but hadn't heard from directly. "I want to address the comments about parental responsibility," Sarah continued. "I agree that parents should provide for their children. Every day I do everything in my power to give Jamie what he needs. But sometimes, despite working 60-hour weeks, it's not enough." She paused, gathering courage for what she needed to say next. "The week that inspired this project, I had to choose between buying Jamie's school supplies and paying our electric bill. I chose to keep our lights on, planning to buy supplies with my next paycheck. I didn't tell Jamie's teacher because I was ashamed. No parent wants to admit they can't provide the basics." The gymnasium remained silent as Sarah continued. "This isn't about handouts or enabling irresponsibility. It's about recognizing that sometimes hardworking people still struggle, and their children shouldn't be punished for it. What these amazing kids have created isn't just about supplies. It's about dignity, community, and making sure every child can focus on learning instead of feeling ashamed." As Sarah returned to her seat, Sophia's parents stood up together. "We are the Martinezes," Sophia's father said in accented English. "When we came to this country 15 years ago, we had nothing. Neighbors shared what they had: food, children's clothes, school supplies for Sophia's older brothers. Today, we own a small business and can provide for our family. Now we donate to help others, just as we were once helped." He gestured toward the children. This is the American dream, not just success for yourself, but creating success for your community. These children understand this better than many adults. One by one, other parents and community members rose to speak, some sharing their own struggles, others acknowledging their privilege and desire to contribute. The conversation shifted from criticism to constructive discussion about implementation details and sustainability. As the meeting finally adjourned, Jamie looked up at his mother with new understanding in his eyes. She had never spoken publicly about their financial struggles before, always working to shield him from adult concerns. "You were really brave, Mom," he whispered as they gathered their things. Sarah smiled, brushing his hair back from his forehead. "I learned it from you," she replied softly. On the drive home, Jamie was unusually thoughtful. "Some people really didn't like our idea," he finally said. Sarah nodded. "That happens with most important changes. When people challenge something new, it doesn't always mean the idea is wrong. Sometimes it means it's important enough to make people think and talk about difficult things." Jamie considered this. "So maybe the arguing was actually good?" "In a way," Sarah agreed. "Your project got adults to discuss something they usually ignore, that not all families have the same resources, and that it affects children's education. That conversation needed to happen." Jamie nodded slowly, processing this perspective. Outside the car window, the city lights blurred as they drove toward their modest apartment. Both mother and son changed by the evening's events in ways they were only beginning to understand. The following Monday, Superintendent Williams personally visited Mrs. Peterson's classroom to share the school board's decision. The children sat attentively at their desks, trying to gauge from the superintendent's expression whether the news would be good or bad. After considerable discussion, Superintendent Williams began, "The board has approved your Supplies for Success program with a few modifications." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. Jamie exchanged excited glances with Sophia at the adjacent desk. "The board was impressed by your thoughtful approach to a real community need," the superintendent continued. "However, they want to ensure the program is sustainable and addresses some of the concerns raised at the meeting." She outlined the modifications. The program would initially be implemented as a pilot at 3 schools: Northside Elementary, Lakeside Elementary, and Washington Elementary, with the children's team serving as consultants. The supply shops would incorporate a small service component where students receiving supplies would be encouraged, but not required, to contribute through volunteer activities like helping organize donations or writing thank you notes to sponsors. The board believes this approach balances meeting immediate needs with teaching the value of contribution, Superintendent Williams explained. They were particularly impressed by Sophia's point that everyone can give something, even if it's not money. Sophia sat up straighter, clearly proud that her words had made an impact. "What happens next?" Ms. Peterson asked. "A committee of teachers, parents, and administrators will work with these students to develop implementation guidelines. We'd like to launch the pilot program within a month with evaluation metrics to track its success." After the superintendent, Tia Bao, left, Mrs. Peterson gathered the 4 project leaders near her desk. "This is a big responsibility," she told them. "You'll be helping shape a program that could eventually serve thousands of students. How do you feel about that?" Olivia, ever practical, immediately started listing tasks they would need to complete. Zach wondered aloud about the logistics of setting up shops at other schools. Sophia was already thinking about how to explain their concept to students who hadn't experienced it firsthand. Jamie, however, remained quiet, his expression thoughtful. "Jamie," Miss Peterson prompted gently, "what are you thinking?" "I'm just glad it's going to help other kids," he said simply. "Kids who feel like I did." Over the next few weeks, the classroom transformed into a project headquarters. The children worked with Mrs. Peterson to develop a comprehensive implementation plan, drawing on what they had learned from their own classroom experience. Olivia created a detailed inventory system using a spreadsheet her mother helped design. Zach, whose father was a carpenter, sketched plans for modular shelving units that could be built inexpensively for each school. Sophia drafted multilingual informational materials explaining the program to families. Jamie, finding his particular strength, became the storyteller of the group. He developed a presentation for student assemblies that explained the purpose of the supply shop without stigmatizing those who needed it most. His personal experience gave his words an authenticity that resonated with everyone who heard them. The most important part, he would explain, is that the shop is for everyone. Sometimes you might give, sometimes you might take, but it's always about being part of the community. Ms. Peterson observed with pride as her students applied academic skills to real-world problems. They calculated budgets, wrote persuasive letters to potential donors, researched effective charitable programs, and created graphs to track inventory needs, all while maintaining their regular schoolwork. "We're seeing authentic learning in action," she told Principal Garcia during a progress update. "They're developing skills no standardized test could measure." The project expanded beyond the original team as other students in the class volunteered to help. Marcus created colorful signage for the shops. Lily organized a supply drive competition between classrooms. Even typically disengaged students found roles that excited them, from decorating collection boxes to sorting donations. One afternoon, as the classroom buzzed with productive activity, Sarah Wilson stopped by to drop off a donation, a small bag of pencils and erasers she had purchased with her tip money. "It's not much," she said apologetically to Ms. Peterson. "Every contribution matters," Ms. Peterson assured her. "Jamie has taught us all that." They watched as Jamie confidently led a small group organizing supplies by category, his voice clear and directive where once he had been hesitant to speak at all. "I barely recognize him sometimes," Sarah said softly. "He's like a different child." Ms. Peterson nodded. "Crisis often reveals character. Jamie had this leadership ability all along. He just needed the right circumstances to discover it." As the pilot launch approached, excitement built across the 3 participating schools. Local media covered the preparations, and additional sponsors came forward, including a regional office supply chain that offered to provide quarterly donations to all 3 locations. The day before the official launch, representatives from each school gathered in the Northside Elementary Gym for final training. Jamie, Sophia, Olivia, and Zach took turns explaining different aspects of the program, answering questions with the confidence of experts despite their young age. Principal Garcia opened a large envelope that had arrived that morning. "Before we conclude, I'd like to share something special," she announced. "The mayor has issued an official proclamation declaring next Monday Community Resource Day in recognition of your initiative." Cheers erupted from the assembled students and teachers. Jamie blushed as Principal Garcia handed him the official document with its gold seal. "This belongs to all of us," he said, instinctively, including everyone in the moment of recognition. After the meeting, as they were cleaning up, Mr. Reynolds from Reynolds Investment Group approached the team. "I wanted to give you a preview of something," he said, showing them a professionally designed logo for Supplies for Success, with a tagline reading, "Students helping students." "We've created promotional materials for all 3 schools," Gab explained, "and if the pilot is successful, we're prepared to help expand to every school in the district by next year." The children examined the materials with awe, seeing their classroom project transformed into something official and lasting. That evening, the 4 families gathered at Sophia's house for a celebration dinner. The Martinez home was modest but warm, filled with delicious aromas and lively conversation, as parents who might never have met under other circumstances found common ground in their pride for their children. As plates of homemade enchiladas were passed around the crowded table, Mr. Martinez raised his glass in a toast. "To our children, who remind us that the most important lessons aren't always taught from textbooks." Jamie, sitting between his mother and Sophia, felt a happiness he couldn't quite name. It wasn't just about the success of their project or the recognition they had received. It was something deeper, the sense of belonging to something larger than himself, of making a difference that extended beyond his own life. As the adults continued talking, Jamie slipped outside to the small backyard where Sophia's younger brothers were playing. The night air was cool, the sky clear and filled with stars. Tomorrow would bring the official launch of their program with all its excitement and responsibilities. But for now, in this quiet moment, Jamie simply felt grateful for his mother's courage, for Sophia's friendship, for Miss Peterson's transformation, and for the unexpected journey that had begun with an empty desk and a teacher's harsh words. Sometimes, he was learning, the worst moments could lead to the best changes if you were brave enough to face them. The day before the official Supply Share Day launch, Ms. Peterson's classroom hummed with anticipation. Colorful banners hung from the walls, and the prototype supply shop in the corner had been meticulously organized, each pencil, notebook, and marker arranged with care. The children moved about with purpose, completing final preparations for tomorrow's big event. As the end of the school day approached, Mrs. Peterson gently tapped a small bell on her desk, her signal for attention. The students quickly settled into their seats, curious about this unexpected interruption to their work. "Before we end our day," Ms. Peterson began, her voice carrying a note of unusual emotion, "I'd like to share something personal with all of you." The classroom grew still. In all their time with Ms. Peterson, the children had rarely heard her speak about herself. She had always maintained a certain professional distance, kind but reserved, focused on their academic progress rather than personal connections. "Tomorrow is a significant day for our school and our community," she continued, moving to sit on the edge of her desk rather than standing at the front as she typically did. "But before we celebrate this accomplishment, I think it's important for you to understand why this project means so much to me personally." She took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "When I was about your age, I lived with 3 different foster families in the span of 2 years." A ripple of surprise moved through the classroom. The students exchanged glances, trying to reconcile this revelation with their perception of their always put-together teacher. "My mother was very ill, and my father wasn't in the picture," Ms. Peterson explained. "The foster system was meant to provide stability, but moving between homes meant I was constantly starting over at new schools, often in the middle of the year." Jamie noticed how Mrs. Peterson's usual perfect posture had softened slightly, making her seem more approachable, more human. "Each time I arrived at a new school," she continued, "I came with whatever belongings fit in a small duffel bag. Rarely did that include proper school supplies. Some foster families provided what I needed, but others expected the school to handle it or simply didn't consider it important." Sophia raised her hand tentatively. "Was it hard not having the right supplies?" Ms. Peterson nodded. "It was difficult in practical ways, not being able to complete assignments properly, borrowing and returning materials each day. But the hardest part was feeling different, feeling like everyone could see that I didn't belong." Jamie felt a jolt of recognition at those words, the same feelings he had experienced at his empty desk that fateful morning. "Different teachers handled it in different ways," Ms. Peterson went on. "Some quietly provided what I needed. Others made a point of noting my lack of preparation in front of the class." She looked directly at Jamie, then a silent acknowledgement, passing between them. "As I got older, I developed a belief that strict structure and high expectations were what helped children succeed, especially those facing challenges at home. Structure was something I could control when so much in my life had been unpredictable." Ms. Peterson stood now, walking slowly between the rows of desks. "I became a teacher because I wanted to provide the stability and guidance that had sometimes been missing in my own childhood. I believed that maintaining high standards and clear consequences would prepare you for a world that isn't always kind or accommodating." She paused near Jamie's desk. "But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of something equally important, that children need both structure and compassion, that sometimes the greatest learning happens when we make space for each other's circumstances and challenges." Olivia raised her hand. "Is that why you changed our classroom around? Because of what happened with Jamie?" Ms. Peterson nodded. "That morning was a wake-up call for me. It reminded me of my own experiences as a child and made me question whether my approach was truly serving all of you. Zach, usually reluctant to speak up in class discussions, surprised everyone by asking, "Do you think the old way was wrong?" Mrs. Peterson considered the question thoughtfully. Not entirely wrong, no. Structure and high expectations are still valuable, but applying them rigidly without making room for individual circumstances or needs, that's where I went astray. She returned to the front of the room, standing taller now. What I've learned from all of you through this project is that true education balances accountability with compassion, excellence with understanding. You've reminded me why I became a teacher in the first place, not just to help you master academic subjects, but to help you become thoughtful, empathetic human beings. The classroom remained quiet as the students absorbed their teacher's words. For many, it was the first time they had considered that teachers, especially one as seemingly perfect as Mrs. Peterson, had their own stories, their own struggles, their own reasons for becoming who they were. So, tomorrow, Mrs. Peterson concluded, when we launch the supply shop, it's not just about pencils and notebooks. It's about creating the kind of community I wish I'd had as a child, one where asking for help isn't shameful, where everyone's needs matter, and where we recognize that circumstances don't define a person's worth or potential. The final bell rang, but no one immediately moved to pack up. The usual end-of-day rush was replaced by a thoughtful stillness. Finally, Jamie stood up from his desk and walked to the supply shop corner. He picked up one of the small welcome packages they had prepared for tomorrow's launch. A zippered pouch containing basic supplies, each labeled with a "Supplies for Success" sticker. He returned to Ms. Peterson and held it out to her. "This is for you," he said quietly. "Not because you need supplies now, but because maybe you needed them then." Ms. Peterson's eyes widened, her carefully maintained composure faltering as she accepted the small package. Around the room, other children began to gather, forming a spontaneous circle around their teacher. "Thank you for telling us your story," Sophia said. "It helps us understand." "Yeah," Marcus added. "It's cool knowing you get it, not just from being a teacher, but from when you were a kid." One by one, the students shared brief words of appreciation or simply stood in solidarity. Even the most restless children remained, sensing the importance of the moment. When the circle finally dispersed and the children began gathering their belongings, Mrs. Peterson carefully placed the supply pouch in her desk drawer. Her hands lingered on it briefly before she closed the drawer, a small gesture containing years of unaddressed emotion. Jamie was one of the last to leave, taking extra time to straighten the supply shop displays. As he headed for the door, Miss Peterson called his name softly. "Jamie?" He turned back. "Yes, Ms. Peterson?" "Sometimes the teacher becomes the student," she said with a gentle smile. "Thank you for that lesson." As Jamie walked down the hallway, toward the exit where his mother would be waiting, he felt a new sense of connection, not just to his classmates or to their project, but to Ms. Peterson herself. They had begun as teacher and student, become adversaries for one difficult moment, and now had reached a new understanding based on shared experience and mutual respect. Tomorrow would be about launching their project, about helping other students across the district. But today had been about something equally important, recognizing that behind every strict rule or harsh word might be a story untold, a wound unhealed, a person doing their best with the tools they had, and sometimes Jamie realized the greatest gift wasn't supplies at all, but simply being seen and understood for who you really were. 6 months later, on a bright spring morning, Jamie stood beside Sophia, Olivia, and Zach at the front of the Northside Elementary Auditorium. Before them sat students and teachers from all 15 schools in the district, gathered for the first annual Supplies for Success Summit. Colorful banners hung from the walls, each representing a different school that had implemented the program over the past half year. Superintendent Williams approached the microphone with a broad smile. are when these four remarkable third graders launched their initiative 6 months ago, none of us could have predicted how far it would reach. Today, over 3,000 students across our district have accessed the supply shops, and we've received inquiries from 12 neighboring districts interested in replicating the model. Pride swelled in Jamie's chest as he gazed out at the audience. What had begun as his moment of humiliation had transformed into something that helped thousands of children. The journey hadn't always been smooth. There had been logistical challenges, occasional resistance, and the constant need to refine their approach. But the core concept had proven both resilient and effective, as Superintendent Williams invited them to speak. Jamie stepped forward first, no longer the hesitant boy afraid to be noticed. When we started this project, we just wanted to solve a simple problem, making sure every student had the supplies they needed without feeling embarrassed, he began, his voice clear and confident. But we've learned that it was never really about pencils and notebooks. It was about dignity, community, and looking out for each other. Sophia spoke next, explaining how the project had evolved. Each school had adapted the model to fit their unique needs while maintaining the core principles: universal access, preservation of dignity, and community involvement. Some had expanded to include gently used clothing or books. Others had incorporated skill-sharing components where students taught each other talents, ranging from origami to basic coding. As Olivia shared the impressive statistics they had collected, donations received, students served, volunteer hours contributed, Jamie caught sight of his mother in the audience. Sarah Wilson sat proudly in the third row, no longer wearing her hospital scrubs, but instead dressed in a neat business outfit. The Supplies for Success initiative had led to unexpected opportunities for her as well. She now worked part-time as the district's community resource coordinator while completing her associate's degree in social work. Their family circumstances had improved in other ways, too. The publicity surrounding the project had inadvertently reconnected them with Jamie's father, who had contacted Sarah after seeing their story in the newspaper. While he wasn't back in their lives permanently, he had begun making regular child support payments and occasionally spent weekends with Jamie. The additional financial stability had allowed them to move from their cramped apartment to a small but comfortable rental house closer to the school. When it was Zach's turn to speak, he highlighted the unexpected educational benefits of the program. Teachers report that classroom participation has increased because students always have what they need to complete their work, he explained. And many of us have learned real-world skills through managing the shops like inventory, budgeting, and communication. Principal Garcia stepped forward next, inviting representatives from each school to share brief testimonials about their experiences with the program. As Jamie listened to students from across the district, from kindergartners to high schoolers, describe how the supply shops had affected their schools, he marveled at how a single classroom initiative had created such widespread change. Ms. Peterson sat in the front row, beaming with pride at her students. The past 6 months had transformed her teaching as dramatically as it had changed Jamie's life. She still maintained high academic standards, but now balanced them with a newfound emphasis on social-emotional learning and community building. Her classroom remained among the highest achieving in the school, but visitors now remarked on the warm, collaborative atmosphere as much as the impressive test scores. When the formal presentations concluded, students and teachers broke into workshop groups to exchange ideas for sustaining and improving the program. Jamie found himself leading a discussion with students from several schools, sharing strategies for ensuring that new students learned about the supply shops without stigma or embarrassment. During a break in the workshops, Jamie wandered over to the refreshment table where he encountered a small boy he didn't recognize, probably a first or second grader from another school. "Are you really Jamie Wilson?" the boy asked, eyes wide with something like awe. "The one who started the whole thing?" Jamie smiled, still not entirely comfortable with his minor celebrity status within the district. "I didn't do it alone," he replied. "It was a team effort." The boy nodded seriously. "My mom lost her job last month and she was really worried about my school stuff, but then my teacher told her about the supply shop, and now I have everything I need." He lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "And I help organize the shop during recess 2 days a week. That's my way of saying thanks." A warm feeling spread through Jamie's chest. This was what mattered most. Not the recognition or the awards the project had received, but the direct impact on children who might otherwise have sat at empty desks, feeling the shame he had once felt. As the summit concluded, Superintendent Williams presented each of the 4 original team members with a special certificate of recognition. "These students have taught us that age is no barrier to creating meaningful change," she announced. They identified a problem, developed a solution, and persevered through challenges. They embody the very purpose of education, not just to learn, but to apply that learning to improve our world. Afterward, as families mingled during the reception, Jamie found himself standing beside Mrs. Peterson. "Did you ever imagine it would go this far?" he asked his teacher. Miss Peterson shook her head, smiling. "Honestly, no. But that's the thing about positive change, Jamie. It tends to ripple outward in ways we can't predict." She gestured toward the crowded auditorium where students from across the district chatted animatedly, exchanging ideas and forming new connections. "Look at what you've started. And this is just the beginning." As Jamie prepared to leave with his mother, a reporter from the Valley Tribune, the same one who had written the original article, approached for a follow-up interview. 6 months in, "What's the most important lesson you've learned from this experience?" Donna Chen asked. Jamie considered the question carefully. So much had changed. In his school, in his family, in himself. How could he possibly distill it into a single lesson? Finally, he said, "I learned that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best changes if you're brave enough to speak up and lucky enough to have people who listen." Walking out into the spring sunshine, Jamie felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey of the past 6 months, for Sophia's courage in standing up for him, for Ms. Peterson's willingness to change, for his mother's bravery in sharing their story, and for all the unexpected allies who had helped transform a classroom incident into a district-wide movement. As they reached the car, Sarah put her arm around her son's shoulders. "Proud of you, kiddo," she said simply. Jamie nodded, watching. As a new family entered the school, a nervous-looking mother and a small girl clutching an empty backpack. He didn't know their story, but he knew that inside those doors they would find not judgment, but support, not isolation, but community. And really, wasn't that the most important school supply of all?